welcome back to Insights with Nandu. Thank you for making this channel a success. And please do like, subscribe, and comment on the videos and share them with your friends and colleagues. Today, we're going to talk about culture. We've talked about leadership at great length. And now, to build on that, we're going to talk about an important responsibility of leadership, which is to build the culture in your teams, in your company, in your organizations. So, what is culture? And you might have heard people say this: culture eats strategy for breakfast. What does that mean? Is strategy not important? Well, sure it is. What it means is this, that a mediocre strategy, well implemented, is better than a brilliant strategy that is not implemented. Because ultimately, the culture of your organization determines how well the strategy is executed. So, there's a very nice video by the late Professor Shumantra Ghoshal. It's an 8-minute video of a speech he gave at the World Economic Forum. You can find it on YouTube. Just search for the smell of the place. And here he uses the metaphor of smell to describe the culture. And he says, companies can either smell like downtown Calcutta on a hot summer's day, or it can smell like Fontainebleau forest in spring in France. One is very energy sapping, one is really energy giving, and you feel like jumping and dancing, doing things. And what drives the smell of the place? What Professor Ghoshal says in this fabulous and famous video is the following. He says, look, this is determined by four factors. The first factor is the strategy. How do you define the strategy? Is it defined as a box of constraints, what you can do, what you cannot do, the way it's communicated through the organization? Or is strategy a direction and a series of stretch ambitions that people are invited to participate in getting to? So constraint versus stretch. How do you define and communicate your strategy through the organization? The second important lever is the processes in the company, in the organization. Are these processes, the motivation behind them, are they compliance oriented? Are people doing it because they have to tick the box and say, yes, I complied? Or are they doing it because they genuinely believe in it and there is a discipline towards doing them without necessarily supervision? So that's on the processes. I would add to this to say, ideally, we should have processes that are more forward-looking rather than only backward-looking. Typically, in most companies, the reports that we look at are last month's sales, last quarter performance, last year performance. It's a little bit like driving a car, always looking in the rear view mirror to see what happened behind. So include, as part of processes, include also some processes that are forward-looking, that try to assess your competitiveness out there. What's your consumer preference? What's the customer feedback? What's the market share? So stuff like that. So strategy, processes, two important levers to deciding the smell of the place. The third important lever is team dynamics. How do teams interact with each other? Are their interactions kind of stipulated by contract? Are they contractual in nature? It says your job is a contract, your deliverables are a contract. Is that a contractual? Or are they based on trust? A team where everybody trusts the other person to deliver what their responsibility is, so that they can stop looking over the other person's shoulder. That's the team dynamics. And occasionally, if somebody needs help, he or she puts up the hand and says, listen, I need help, and then people try to help. So the team really has to be supporting in that way. So trust-based relationships more than contractual relationships. And finally, leadership. And how does leadership regard its role? Does leadership see its role as one whose job is there to exercise control? Or does leadership see its role as my role is to help provide you support, provide you the resources so that you can achieve these stretch goals based on these relationships of trust and leveraging each other's strengths that you have built over time, and with discipline to make sure that we still deliver all the KPIs that we do need to deliver and the processes that we need to follow. So these are the four levers really that Professor Ghoshal tells us contribute towards building a culture, which then he characterizes with the metaphor of the smell of the place. Now, we've all seen this in our working lives. We've been to organizations or smaller bits of organization which have smelt like downtown Calcutta in summer. We have seen other organizations where everybody seems to be having a great time and they're hitting all their numbers and kicking all the goals, and you wonder how are these things so different. Well, there's some very interesting work, and there's an article in the Harvard Business Review about this, but you can check it out by David Lewis of London Business School and Alison Reynolds of Ashridge. And they talk about two dimensions in the way teams kind of interact and leadership builds teams. The one dimension is cognitive diversity. How much cognitive diversity do you have within these teams? Do you have people who all think the same way? Or do you have people who bring vastly different thinking styles to how they approach problems and situations? And the other dimension is how much psychological safety do you create inside the teams? Do people feel that there is enough psychological safety to be different, to say different things, still within the overall atmosphere of trust and support? Or are they feeling constrained because it's a control and contract-based environment? And you can kind of look at this typically in an organization where there is low cognitive diversity, so everybody is trained and thinks in the same way, and there is low psychological safety. What do we call this organization? Well, it's a bureaucracy. And typically you find it in governments or in large organizations and departments where processes have acquired a bureaucratic momentum of their own. So on the other hand, you have a startup, and in a startup, there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of risk taking, and therefore a lot of tolerance for failure. So there's a lot of psychological safety. So let's go out and try this moonshot, see if it works. And ideally, the startup has a diversity of thinking styles so they can bring different approaches to solve a particular problem. And those are just the two extremes. Most organizations fall somewhere in between. So the job of the leader is to assess where the culture is at today, and then figure out how do we move the culture, where do we need to get to, and how do we actually move this over there. So the move has to be based on working on all four of the levers. You have to work on strategy, you have to work on processes, you have to work on team dynamics, and you have to work on leadership behaviors. And working on all four of these levers in a conscious way, you can actually change the organization culture over a period of time. For those of you who were with me on the journey in the Philippines with Nestle in 2005, you have some idea of how we accomplished this. And you recall we did work on exactly the same four levers. Strategy, we made fundamental decisions, which businesses to invest in, which businesses to exit, and which, within those businesses, specifically which marketing strategies were more likely to give us the results. And we did some trial and error to establish these strategies. On processes, we got rid of a lot of legacy processes and we introduced new processes that were really forward-looking, but with a huge element of discipline behind those processes, which was essential. Team dynamics and leadership behaviors. We went through these extensive workshops. Every week there was a team that went off into a 2-day workshop every week over 5 years for leadership development and team dynamics and personal improvement. And I, as a CEO, made it a point to spend half a day out of every 2 of these days with those teams talking about leadership and what needed to be changed and helping them to make that improvement. So you need to work on all 4 of these levers, and you need to be cognizant of this need to create psychological diversity together with cognitive diversity. It's not enough to have cognitive diversity, different styles of thinking, if you cannot create the psychological diversity, if people feel afraid to speak up or afraid to think differently or afraid to contribute differently. So, and as it happens in that particular instance, and again, for those of you who are familiar with that journey, we not only managed to move the needle on the culture, but in the process, we started to deliver outsized results in the company, whether it was sales, market share, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, profitability, working capital. There were outsized returns that came place because everybody in the organization was working in line with the same kind of an approach. So, this kind of an approach, which is based on a way of working and continuous improvement, does deliver results. So, some of you will say to me, yes, but this is only possible, if you're the boss, if you're the CEO. Yeah, true. The CEO has to be the chief coach and the person who owns the culture. But also within your department, within your business unit, within your branch office, there is always a micro culture, and that micro culture depends on you, your role to create it. So while you can point the fingers at the CEO that way, there's a team of 50 people here who are pointing the finger right at you. And it's your role to be aware of what is the culture of the place and work consciously with the change agents within the team at tweaking these 4 levers, still being consistent with the overall corporate strategy and processes and policies. But to move the needle so the teams actually become more empowered, that they enjoy their work, and they actually go the extra mile to create that little bit extra that makes all the difference between winning and being an also-ran in business. So that's just a very, very quick, short summary in 10 minutes of culture. I actually teach this in my business school. So if you want to learn more about it, you have to come and attend one of my sessions at business school. For the moment, however, if you enjoyed this, please do like, please do subscribe, please do comment, and please reshare this with your friends, your colleagues, and anybody who you think could benefit from this. Thank you for listening.